Welcome back to America. Tonight we've been talking about this gunman and this situation in Orlando with 50 dead and 53 injured, and the fact that the FBI had spoken to him twice, and what the ex-wife is saying, and all kinds of little sad nuggets are starting to fall out of the sky as to more information on him, and how could anyone have stopped him, and that is the question. Dr. G.M. Cox joins us. He is absolutely a law enforcement expert. He's the director of public administration at the master's degree program at Tarleton State University. So what was your first reaction when you heard what happened with this mass shooting in Orlando? Did, like so many of us, we automatically assumed terror because it sort of was being pumped out that way?
I agree. As a matter of fact, that's exactly what I thought. I said, oh, my God. Of course, the first report, there was 20 people. And then now we know there's 49, including plus the shooter. So, my first thought was, oh, my gosh, we have another 9/11 or a San Bernardino kind of event. And of course, I think like every American does, we probably thought, oh, this is another terrorist attack. Wait and see what happens. And that's exactly what happens. We see a radical Islamist has been radicalized, even declared his fidelity to ISIS.
Yeah, and the in talking about law enforcement and these situations, here it was at this nightclub, and they were trying to negotiate with him. I mean, how tough is it in that situation?
Well, I think we have to keep in mind that when they first engaged this guy, the shooter, it was more of an active shooter situation, which it requires an immediate response. It requires taking on the shooter and stop the aggression. On the other hand, once it transitioned, and these are very dynamic situations, once it transitioned to a hostage situation, now the police officers have to hold and see what they've got, because they cannot be seen to unnecessarily put innocents at risk and or shoot them themselves. I mean, can you imagine what would happen if they accidentally got in the crosshairs and one of the individuals that got shot by law enforcement was a citizen? So they have to slow down, because there's no evidence that I've been able to hear that he was still an active shooter and executing people inside. If that's the case, then they should have gone in immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know this, too. He'd been interviewed by the FBI over a potential terror link, and, he was twice they talked to him. So some people are saying, well, how could the FBI not have gotten him? But here's the thing. You have to have evidence. They questioned him. They questioned other people. Geez, that's just a terrible situation.
It is, but I think it's fair to ask, why wasn't his name within the national background check for weapons at least flagged? We have 2 confirmed contacts with the FBI. We have 1 possible additional one, which is 3. So I don't know about you, but there's over 330 million Americans, and this one guy gets some attention from the FBI. I think it would have been reasonable to put him on at least not necessarily a watch list, but at least flag his name in the national background registry. Yeah,
and that's absolutely the definite question. Why didn't that happen? Isn't this what the big push is for? And as much as there's this sort of grab for guns, look what could have already happened and didn't happen right there.
Absolutely. He bought the gun legally. I mean, the dialogue everybody wants to focus on is this inanimate object called a weapon, a gun, and it's not. We should be focusing on the guy, this radicalized individual, this American, killed other Americans over this radical ideology that, number one, we're not even allowed to talk about. So, you saw the president immediately, he refused to call it radical Islam. He just called it was a radicalized individual that conducted a terrorist activity. When you cannot control or at least have a full dialogue, it kind of means you can't talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah, and when we see stuff like this happen, which is terrible, our worst mass shooting, like you said, focus on the guy, Omar Mateen, then my fear is that somebody else decides to do almost a copycat kind of thing. And I've talked with people in the FBI, and I've talked with plenty of others who have gone through lists and whatnot, and they fear that there'll be more lone wolf terrorists like him that will proclaim that they're doing this in the name of ISIS. In fact, I had somebody pretty high up in the FBI tell me that is exactly what they talk about constantly as what they're the most concerned about.
Right, absolutely. I mean, because these individuals are already open to suggestion.
Yeah.
Or they wouldn't be able to be radicalized anyway. So they start seeing, number one, this guy's pretty successful in the eyes of the terrorists. I mean, he kills 50 people, wounds 53. He engages law enforcement, and now he's gone on to meet Allah, and his promised land is there, and he's become a hero within the ISIS community, this radicalized Islamist community. And that's so. You think an individual who has got no fame. Look at before yesterday. I mean, the world did not know who Mateen was. Now everybody knows who he is.
Yeah.
And so they see this fame being attached. They see that he's successful, and why can't I do the same? So, yeah, I think there's a certain degree of copycat concern. On the other hand, we know these, and we should understand that there are other individuals in the United States who have been radicalized and just waiting for the right moment, the right target. And we all have to do a better job of not only screening those folks, but taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, when you say taking care of ourselves, what should you do, when you're in public places, when you're in crowded places? I think we just feel like we're in a bubble, but is it smart to look around, know those exits, etc.?
That's exactly right. There's a great book out there. I highly recommend your listeners read it. It's called Escape the Wolf, Wolf Being a Threat, and it's written by a guy named Clint Emerson. And he talks about situational awareness. He talks about personal awareness. When you walk into a place, have you scoped out the exits? Don't focus on the people so much. But I got to tell you, if you see a guy walking through the front door carrying a weapon of any kind, dressed in all black, you ought to say, this is not the proper venue for that, and bells should go off in your head. But at the same time, I want them to focus on the physical locality. Where are the exits? What can you do if you had to run? And that's the first thing I'd recommend. If confronted, run. If you can't run, hide. If you can't hide, then be prepared to fight.
Yeah, wow, great advice. Absolutely. Escape the wolf. All right, Dr. G.M. Cox, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
All right, so you heard what Dr. Cox had to say, some great advice, especially I like what he talked about in that book, the fact that they talk about situational awareness, not to be paranoid, but just to know your surroundings. Safe in many, many ways, because I've said this before, what if there's a fire? What if there's something else that happens and you have no idea which direction you're even headed? You could save yourself, maybe save your life, save yourself a lot of grief, or, save some other people, who knows. So the man responsible for the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history has been described by his ex-wife as emotionally unstable. He was interviewed, as I mentioned, by the FBI over potential terror links. He pledged his allegiance in the 911 call to ISIS. He had a steady job. A former co-worker of the 29-year-old Mateen's, talked about or claimed that he said he saw the attack coming. He said he was an angry person, violent in nature, a bigot in almost every class of person. This was a guy named Dan Gilroy, who was a security guard beside Mateen for about a year, between 2014 and 2015. And he's now a police officer, and he said that Mateen's behavior, check this out, was so concerning to him that he quit working with him. He saw the red flags, didn't like it, quit working with him. Now, there again, nothing happens. Company, what's the company doing? He was a security officer at G4S Security Solutions, which is one of the world's largest private security companies. So he had a gun. I mean, he was registered a gun for what he did. According to a neighbor, here's the thing. While a security guard often manning the metal detectors at the front of the building, the courthouse in Port St. Lucie, he was there. He was married to a woman who lived with him in a condo, and they had a 3.5-year-old son. Just crazy. It boggles the mind. 20 minutes into the attack, I mentioned that he pledges allegiance to ISIS. He calls 911, tells a dispatcher that he pledges his allegiance to ISIS. He mentions the 2013 Boston Marathon bomber, the bombers, both of them. And as I mentioned, the FBI interviewed him in 2 terror-related cases, but both of them were closed. He wasn't under investigation. He wasn't being surveilled at the time of the attack. They say the interviews turned out to be inconclusive, so there was nothing to keep the investigation going, is what the FBI says. They interviewed him over a possible connection with an American suicide bomber. Wow, wow, wow. Sad, sad way to kick off the week in talking about this, and so sorry for the people in Orlando and the families whose lives are shattered by just an absolutely shocking mass shooting on Saturday. Stay with us.